Hello, this is I Go Travel with Don Barnett. We are rolling into Idaho country, and we're going into the land where the final assault by the American Army against Indian people occurred.
The historians and the tourist signs call it a war, but war usually occurs between two roughly equal adversaries. This was not a war. In reality, it was a manhunt conducted by the military against innocent people placed in an impossible situation by changing American government policies.
This map tells it all. Look at the original size of the treaty. The land was huge and adequate. The treaty was signed in 1855, and the Nez Perce lived in peace on their reservation for 30 years. Then the American government got greedy and said, we have more white people, more industry, more development on the reserve land. We want you to now move to a new defined area that reduced the size of the reserve by 90% in this little area here in dark. Well, the Nez Perce living outside the immediate new small reserve area were not pleased at all. Tensions rose, conflict occurred, and the military came in to force the Nez Perce into the small reservation. When the Nez Perce refused to go on to the smaller reserve area, the American government declared them as non-treaty Indians. And as non-treaty Indians, they were, in effect, illegal, in effect, criminals in their own land. And it gave the right to the military to go after those who refused to go into the new restricted reservation area. The main spokesman was Chief Joseph here, but there were other equally important chiefs. Chiefs like White Bird, Yellow Wolf, Olcott, Looking Glass, and Lean Elk, or Poker Joe, as he was better known as. And he took over the leadership of the fleeing group after the devastating U.S. Army attack at Big Hole. Today, you can drive the route of the Nez Perce flight from the U.S. Army on the Nez Perce National Historic Trail. Let's look at the three most significant battles in this struggle. Although there were several skirmishes and smaller battles, the first significant battle occurred in Idaho at White Bird Canyon. And then the Nez Perce left and over Lolo Pass into Montana through the Bitter Root Valley and rested at Big Hole, where the second significant battle occurred. And from Big Hole, the Nez Perce continued to flee southward into Yellowstone National Park in the corner of Wyoming today, hoping to find allegiance and support from the Crow Indian Nation just north of the Yellowstone. And after that, the last chapter was the desperate flight to the safety across the Canadian border and the final battle at Bear Paw in Montana. Let's go back to the first battle in White Bird Canyon, which was in the heart of the former reservation area, but no longer part of the reservation, as it was now defined. And the Army marched in there to move the Indians out to the smaller reservation area. The highway today overlooks White Bird Canyon, where the battle occurred. One soldier recorded in his journal that we were to have the surprise of our lives. They did have, then scrambled out of the canyon quickly. 34 soldiers died. The Nez Perce lost none because they were better planned,
had the superior Appaloosa horses, and most important, they were aware of the enemy's movements and location. On the other hand, the military was tired from a long march. Many were inexperienced in warfare and had no idea of neither their adversary's strength nor their location. These are some of the Army leaders, but many rank and file soldiers were recent immigrants, spoke little or no English, worked for low pay, wore ill-fitting uniforms, ate too much bad food, and often were equipped with outdated Civil War rifles. It was not the first time that the field soldier was sent to best enforce unpopular and ill-advised government demands and policies often made far distances away. The rout at Whitebird Canyon surprised and embarrassed the Army, and a $500 reward was set for Whitebird's capture, something that did not happen. The Nez Perce knew more soldiers would be coming and decided that their best choice was to flee. They would go over Lolo Pass, which is south of present-day Missoula today, and they would travel to the land of the Yellowstone, where they would seek allies with the Crow people and further resist the American military.
The so-called Nez Perce War occurred over a distance of 12,000 kilometers from Idaho to Montana over a 4-month period. Along the way, there were 20 battles and skirmishes, and it involved roughly 2,000 soldiers as compared to only 750 Nez Perce. And of that 750, only about 250 were able-bodied warriors capable of fighting. The rest, roughly 500, the majority were the elderly, the sick, women and children. They carried with them roughly 2,000 horses and 700 or 800 head of cattle, and the cattle had to be soon abandoned along the route. After the Battle of White Bird, Chief Joseph led his people over Lolo Pass and into the Bitterroot Valley of Montana without incident, and rested at a place called Big Hole.
Today, Big Hole is a National Battlefield Historic Park. The women picked berries that morning, and children played, and the men rested and hunted small game when the surprise military attack started. The troops came from the left, and the Nez Perce eventually fled to the right. An estimated 300 Nez Perce were killed, men, women, and children. The rest fled northward into the unknown prairie. The Nez Perce escaped the army, but it was a devastating loss. Lean Elk took over leadership from Chief Joseph, and the survivors struggled south and eastward toward the Yellowstone. North of Yellowstone, the Nez Perce, or Nimi-Poo, hoped to form an alliance with the Crow people. But the Crow, however sympathetic they might have been, were not about to get involved in a potential bloodbath not of their own making. The Crow had served as scouts and advisors to the American Army only a year earlier, when the Lakota Sioux had annihilated the entire 7th Cavalry under George Custer. Further, the Crow had just completed a treaty with the Americans. So once the Nimi-Poo realized this, the desperate run north to the safety across the Canadian border started. The run from the army was now a miserable and a disastrous affair. Somewhere along the trail, a Nimi-Poo warrior Black Eagle reported the following, and I quote, "All along the trail was crying, old people, half-grown boys and girls, mothers and little babies, many only half buried and left for the wolves and coyotes."
They moved toward the Canadian border and spent their last night in the shadows of the Bear Paw Mountains to rise in the morning and go the last 60 kilometers to the Canadian border. But it was not to be. They awoke to Army gunfire. Again, it was frantic and chaos.
Mothers strapped their infants and young children to horses and chased the horses away from the intense and indiscriminate Army gunfire, never to see their children again, never to know whether or not the children survived the frantic run into the prairies.
About 300 of the Nez Perce escaped to Canada. And they were met by Sitting Bull, the Lakota Sioux chief who had escaped to Canada as well about a year before after the victory over Custer and the 7th Cavalry. And many of the Lakota, merchant, the Canadian trader reported that many of the women were disoriented and still crying over the unknown fate of their children. And eventually, many of the Nez Perce settled in the Pincher Creek area for a while. The Chief Joseph made his famous speech at the surrender, which ended with the words, many times quoted, "I will fight no more forever." Chief Joseph was promised a return to his homeland, but it never happened. He was exiled to a reservation in far-off Washington state, and he only returned to his homeland after death, and he's buried in the Poussey Hills of Idaho. I hope you enjoyed that video and maybe learned a little bit of something out of it. This is I Go Travel with Don Barnett. Hit the subscribe button and that'll help us bring and tell you when more videos are coming on the internet. So long for now. We're rolling on to new stories and new things.
I made another video on the Nez Perce and the Appaloosa horses of the rolling hills of Idaho. And that's in the same playlist as this one. And you can find these playlists if you do at the top up here where it says Google the little @ Don Barnett 5090. Click on my name and hit the word playlists in the middle of the screen. Scroll down and you'll see all of the playlists there. And each playlist has several videos in it.